What if the man who has spent years fighting for his privacy, the very same man who left his home, his country, even his family, all to escape the relentless scrutiny of the tabloids, suddenly became the source of someone else's public humiliation? That's where we find ourselves today, with Prince Harry back in London, sitting in the Supreme Court, but not for the reasons anyone expected. The cameras are here. The whispers are everywhere. And somewhere, in the hush of a courtroom packed with anticipation, the words that will soon ignite chaos are about to be spoken. But before we continue, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Harry's return isn't just symbolic. It's a reminder that even the most protected lives in Britain's royal orbit are never fully shielded. He's here for his privacy trial, the third and final in a series of legal battles against the tabloid press. These aren't abstract headlines on a page. They are daily intrusions, breaches of trust, moments of exposure that have shadowed him for more than a decade. And now, ironically, one sentence from his testimony threatens to turn that protective fight inside out. One sentence, and the attention shifts. One sentence, and someone he once cared about is caught in the glare of public speculation. That someone is Chelsy Davy, the former girlfriend whose name, until now, existed largely in private memory and discreet social mentions. But when Harry referred in court to an early girlfriend who had allegedly been paid off by the tabloids, the public didn't need much to connect the dots. Within hours, the narrative had taken on a life of its own. Headlines, tweets, online threads, they all pointed fingers. And while Harry's intent may have been general, theoretical, even cautionary, the fallout was immediate. Chelsy, known for her grace and discretion, found herself under the unforgiving spotlight of media speculation, her reputation at stake. But there's more than just gossip here. There's tension, betrayal, even. The man who spent years shielding himself from exposure may have, without realizing it, thrust someone else into a vulnerability they never sought. How do you protect your privacy when the words you choose, carefully, deliberately, can ripple beyond your control? How do you navigate a world where a single sentence, casually uttered in a courtroom, can become a weapon against someone you once cared for? And for Chelsy, whose life has largely been private since her relationship with Harry ended, the intrusion is personal, direct, and legally actionable. We are at the intersection of trust and consequence, of public fascination and private pain. And in the quiet of the Supreme Court, beneath the gaze of lawyers, journalists, and an audience waiting for every nuance, the stage is set. But this isn't just a legal story. It's a human story, about decisions, about words, about the way our lives can unravel in ways we never intended. And yet, even as the courtroom prepares for testimony, the question hangs over everything. What exactly did Harry say that lit this fire? What were the consequences he could not foresee? And what comes next for Chelsy Davy, whose reputation is now on the line? And for Harry himself, who may have unwittingly opened a door he thought was closed. They say you can never go home again. But there he was, Prince Harry, stepping out of a black SUV in central London, the unmistakable silhouette of a man returning not as a prince, but as a plaintiff. No royal fanfare, no waving crowds. Just a hard gray sky overhead, the buzz of press lenses clicking into place, and the quiet tension of a man who knew that what happened inside that courtroom might follow him forever. And maybe, drag someone else down with him. It wasn't his first time facing the British press in court, but this time felt different. The weight in his shoulders, the guarded eyes, even the pace of his stride, it all suggested something more personal was on the line. He wasn't here just to challenge the tabloids. He was here, knowingly or not, to put his past on trial. The past that included her. Now, the Supreme Court isn't known for emotional outbursts or dramatic turns, but it has a gravity of its own. Inside, it was calm, almost eerily so. A few murmurs from the backbenches, legal documents shuffling, a journalist or two jotting notes while pretending not to stare. And then Harry walked in, eyes ahead, lips tight. The air seemed to shift slightly, like everyone knew this wasn't just another legal technicality being argued. This was a reckoning. Because the third trial in his long-standing battle with the UK's tabloid press wasn't just about phone hacking or data breaches. It was about narratives, about who controls the story, about whether a prince, stripped of titles, but not memory, could finally rewrite what was written about him, and who might get caught in the ink spill. Here's the twist. No one, not the press, not the public, not even some inside the courtroom, expected the name Chelsy Davy to hang over the proceedings like smoke after a fire. It hadn't been mentioned outright, but as Harry recounted how an early girlfriend had been secretly paid off by tabloids during their relationship, the room held its breath. Everyone knew who he meant. You could almost feel the glance passing between journalists in the gallery. A few barely concealed nods. The story was forming in real time. And the headlines, they were already being drafted. Chelsy had stayed out of the spotlight for years, chose her privacy, built her business, raised her family. But all it took was one line, one vague reference. And suddenly, the world was staring directly at her again. And Harry? He kept speaking, unaware, or maybe entirely aware, of what had just been set in motion. But he hadn't yet said the most damaging part. And when he did, everything turned. So what did he say? That's what everyone kept asking. As if the quote itself could be separated from its consequences. As if context might cushion the impact. But it didn't. It couldn't. Because once those words left his mouth, the damage was already in motion. The courtroom had been quiet, tense, but controlled. Harry's voice steady as he testified, until he veered slightly. Not off script exactly, but off the legal leash his team had likely spent weeks tightening. He said, in passing really, that one of his early girlfriends had been targeted, that the tabloids had gotten to her, that she'd been paid off to keep quiet about what they'd done. He didn't say Chelsy Davy's name, but he didn't have to. There weren't many candidates. Not many women from that period of his life who had remained public knowledge. Not many who would have mattered enough, heard enough, or, most damningly, stayed silent enough for the comment to carry weight. By the time he paused for breath, it had already happened. The inference, the assumption, the unraveling. Chelsy. The tabloids didn't even wait for confirmation. Within hours, her name was trending. Articles ran with veiled titles. Harry claims X was paid by press. Royal girlfriend silenced by tabloid bribes. But the subtext was blatant. Photos of her from 15 years ago. Vacation shots. Grainy nightclub pictures with Harry's arm draped casually over her shoulders. The narrative was already taking shape, and it wasn't hers. You have to wonder, did Harry know? Did he realize the implications of what he'd said? Or did he think the anonymity would hold? That's the thing about memory and media. Once you've been in the royal orbit, even if you escape, it only takes a spark to reignite the blaze. And Chelsy, for all her efforts to build a life outside that sphere, had just been pulled violently back into it. A woman who had never capitalized on the royal association, who hadn't written books, given tell-alls, or courted tabloids. Now, through no apparent fault of her own, she was the center of a media storm again. Only this time, it wasn't about who she was dating. It was about whether she had been complicit in covering up tabloid wrongdoing, whether she'd taken money, whether she'd stayed silent for a price. And in that silence, a new question emerged. One that spread faster than the original headline. Was it even true? That's when Chelsy broke her silence. And what she did next, nobody saw coming. She'd been silent for years. No interviews, no memoirs, no last-minute media deals. Just a quiet retreat from the royal spotlight that had once followed her everywhere. Chelsy Davy had carved out her own space, away from the chaos, away from the flashbulbs, away from him. But now, she was back in the headlines, against her will. And this time, she wasn't staying silent. It started quietly. A single statement through her legal team, released late in the day. Precise, controlled, but razor-sharp. She denied the claims. Categorically. Firmly, not just the allegation that she had taken money from tabloids, but the implication that she had ever betrayed her own privacy, her dignity, or Harry's. The wording was important. It wasn't just defensive. It was the beginning of something far more aggressive. Within 48 hours, it was official. Chelsy Davy was suing. Libel, reputational harm, emotional distress. It wasn't just a legal response. It was personal. And quietly, behind the scenes, her legal team began preparing something else. A detailed timeline of her relationship with Harry, the press harassment she endured, and most critically, evidence that contradicted the idea she had ever accepted hush money from the media. If true, that would mean Harry's testimony, however vague, had not only mischaracterized her actions but risked branding her as complicit in a system she had, for years, tried to avoid. Think about that. You try to live quietly. You leave the world of royals behind. And one day, in a courtroom you're not even in, your name, your reputation, is dropped into the path of a media freight train. What would you do? Chelsy chose to fight. And here's where the contradiction deepens. Because while Harry was in court to challenge press intrusion into his private life, his words had inadvertently dragged Chelsy's into public view, without her consent and with real consequences. Is that justice? Or irony? That contradiction, privacy champion versus accidental accuser, sits at the heart of the unfolding storm. Harry's legal war, long rooted in personal trauma, now risks collateral damage. And for the first time, Chelsy Davy isn't the quiet ex. She's the plaintiff. The headlines began to shift. Chelsy strikes back. Former royal flame fights libel. Suddenly, it wasn't Harry versus the tabloids. It was Harry versus someone from his own past. And the court isn't the only place this is playing out. Because what Chelsy's team filed next, what they revealed about the real timeline, the behind-the-scenes communication, and the media pressure, left even the courtroom stunned. But what Chelsy had held back, that was the real shock. And it hadn't been made public. Yet, this wasn't supposed to happen. The trial was meant to be a final act, a controlled ending to a long, bitter fight between a royal and the ruthless machinery of the British press. But now, with Chelsy's lawsuit gaining momentum, that story is unraveling. And what's spilling out isn't just about two people. It's about something deeper, something that cuts through the polished facade of celebrity privacy and into the contradictions we rarely confront. What happens when the very fight for privacy ends up exposing someone else? That's the question people can't stop asking. Not just journalists, not just lawyers, ordinary people. Comment sections are full of it. Some defending Harry, claiming his intention was never to name Chelsy. Others siding with her, arguing that intent doesn't erase damage. And then, there's the quiet majority, the ones who see the tragedy in all of it. That two people who once shared something real are now weaponized against each other in the public square. This trial, this throwaway sentence, it's no longer about what was done to Harry. It's about what Harry's done to others. And the timing couldn't be more sensitive. Public trust in media is fractured. The monarchy itself is wobbling under internal pressure and shifting public sentiment. Privacy, once a personal boundary, is now a political football, used by everyone from celebrities to corporations to governments. And yet, the moment someone draws that line too late, the damage is done. So what does this mean for Harry, for Chelsy, for all of us watching? It means the rules are changing. Or maybe, they were never real to begin with. Because if someone as media savvy as Prince Harry, someone who has built an entire post-royal brand on controlling his narrative, can still misstep so badly, what hope do the rest of us have? And Chelsy? Her lawsuit may be just the beginning. If it proceeds, it could open the door to depositions, to subpoenas, to evidence that neither side wants aired. Emails, messages, financial records, all of it potentially dragged into court, under oath, for the world to see. And let's not pretend the press will handle that with restraint. This isn't just a case anymore. It's a spectacle, a power struggle, and at the center of it stands a prince trying to hold on to his truth, and a woman demanding he take responsibility for the way he's told it. But behind closed doors, there's talk of something else. Something bigger than libel. A sealed document. A name neither side wants released. And if that comes out, well, then everything changes. There's something quietly devastating about watching a story loop back on itself. Prince Harry, once the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin under the glare of millions, is now a man standing in court, trying to hold the press accountable for years of intrusion. But somewhere along the way, the narrative twisted. The victim became, however unintentionally, the cause of someone else's pain. And Chelsy Davy, long out of the spotlight, by choice, has now been pulled back into it, not by tabloids, not by royal scandal, but by the very person she once trusted most. That irony sits heavy. This case was never going to be just about legal definitions. Not really. Libel, privacy, emotional harm. Yes, they're written into the filings. But what's unfolding is a story about boundaries, about control, about the fragile line between protecting yourself and harming others in the process. Harry's supporters might say he didn't mean for any of this to happen. And maybe that's true. Maybe it was an honest attempt to explain what the press has done to him.